It was a quiet morning, the kind of morning where time feels slow, almost like it's waiting for something to happen, and maybe that something is you. Have you ever felt like life has already passed you by, like the best moments are behind you, and what's left is just routine, silence, and memories? What if I told you your most meaningful chapter hasn't even started yet? What if today, right now, is not the end of your story, but the beginning of something powerful, something new, something deeply alive? There was a man named Robert. He was 67 years old, a retired school teacher. For most of his life, he followed a simple routine: wake up early, go to work, teach his students, come home, have dinner, and rest. Year after year, he gave his energy to others. He shaped young minds, helped children believe in themselves, and quietly carried the weight of responsibility. But when retirement came, everything changed. The classroom was gone. The noise was gone. The purpose he once felt every day slowly faded into silence. At first, it felt like a break, a well-earned rest. He told himself, "I deserve this." But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and something inside him began to feel empty. He would wake up in the morning and sit by the window, watching people walk by. Young people rushing to work, children laughing on their way to school. Life was moving, but he felt like he was standing still. There were moments when he would whisper to himself, "Is this it? Is this what the rest of my life looks like?" He wasn't sick. He wasn't struggling financially. But deep inside, he felt invisible. His friends had their own lives. His children lived far away. The phone rang less often. The house felt quieter every day. One evening, while sitting alone at the dinner table, he looked around his home. Photos of the past were everywhere. His younger self smiling. His family gathered together. Moments filled with life. And suddenly, a heavy thought hit him. Maybe my best days are gone. That thought stayed with him. It followed him into the night. It echoed in his mind the next morning. He stopped going out as much. He stopped calling people. Slowly, without even realizing it, he began to withdraw from the world. Days became repetitive. Wake up, eat, sit, sleep. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice kept asking, "What's the point now?" One afternoon, while cleaning an old drawer, Robert found something unexpected. It was a small notebook, worn out, slightly dusty. He opened it. Inside were notes from years ago. Ideas, dreams, thoughts he had written when he was younger. One page caught his attention. "I want to write a book one day. A book that helps people feel less alone." He paused. He stared at that sentence for a long time. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the page. More ideas, more dreams, plans he had once believed in but never acted on. And then he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I'm too old for this now," he whispered. But something about that notebook stayed with him. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about that one line, a book that helps people feel less alone. He thought about his students, the ones who struggled, the ones who needed encouragement, the ones who believed in his words. And then he asked himself something he hadn't asked in a long time. What if I'm not done yet? The next morning, something felt different. The silence in the house was still there. The routine was still the same. But inside him, there was a small spark. Not a big change, not a dramatic moment, just a quiet question. What if I try? He sat at his old desk, the same desk he had used for years while grading papers and preparing lessons. But this time, there were no papers to grade, just a blank sheet. He picked up a pen. For a moment, he hesitated. What if I fail? What if this is useless? But then another thought came. What if it isn't? And so, he started writing. At first it wasn't perfect. His words felt slow. His sentences felt unsure. He would write a few lines, then stop, then cross things out. There were days when he felt like giving up. Days when he looked at what he wrote and thought, "This doesn't matter." Days when loneliness still sat beside him like an old shadow. But something had changed. Now, he had a reason to wake up. Every morning, He returned to that desk. Every day, he wrote a little more. Sometimes it was just one paragraph, sometimes just a few sentences. But he kept going. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly, that small notebook dream started to take shape. His words became clearer, his thoughts became stronger, and something inside him began to heal. He started remembering who he was, not just a retired man, not just someone from the past, but someone who still had something to give. One day, he decided to share a small part of his writing online. He wasn't expecting anything. No fame. No attention. He just thought, maybe one person will read this. But something unexpected happened. People responded. Strangers began leaving comments. Thank you. I needed this. This made me feel understood. I thought I was the only one who felt this way. Robert sat there, staring at the screen. Tears filled his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel invisible. His words, his voice, still mattered. And in that moment, something inside him shifted completely. He realized something powerful. Life didn't end when his job ended. Purpose didn't disappear with age. Dreams didn't expire. They were just waiting for him to come back. And that's when Robert made a quiet promise to himself. I'm not done. Not yet. He began writing every single day. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because it made him feel alive again. Because it reminded him he still had a story to tell. And as the days went on, something beautiful happened. The loneliness didn't disappear overnight. The silence didn't vanish completely, but it no longer controlled him, because now he had something stronger. Hope, a reason to move forward, a reason to believe that even at 67, a new chapter could begin. And maybe, just maybe, that chapter could be the most meaningful one of all. So if you're listening to this right now, and something inside you feels quiet, or tired, or forgotten, I want you to know something. Your story is not over. Not even close. There are still pages left to write. There are still moments waiting to be lived. There is still purpose inside you, even if you haven't felt it in a long time. You are not too late. You are not too old. And you are definitely not done. Sometimes life doesn't give you a loud sign. Sometimes it just gives you a small whisper, a memory, an idea, a feeling. And all it asks is, will you listen? Because the truth is, a new chapter doesn't begin with a big moment. It begins with a decision. A quiet, simple decision. To try again. To believe again. To live again. And if this story touched you in any way, if it reminded you of something you've been holding inside, take that step, no matter how small it is. And if you believe more people need to hear this message, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the right story at the right time can change everything. And your story? It's still being written. The next morning, Robert woke up before the sun had fully risen. The room was still dim, wrapped in that soft gray light that comes just before a new day begins. For a moment, he lay there quietly, listening to the silence. But this time, it didn't feel as heavy. There was something different inside him now. Not excitement, exactly. Not even confidence. It was quieter than that. It was willingness. He sat up slowly, took a deep breath, and said to himself, let's continue. That simple sentence carried more strength than anything he had said in months. He made his tea, walked to his desk, and opened his notebook. The pages were no longer empty. They held thoughts, memories, lessons, pieces of a life that still had meaning. But as he began to write, a familiar doubt crept in. Who am I to do this? Does this even matter? What if people stop reading? His hand paused. This was the part no one talks about. The quiet battle that happens after you begin, when the excitement fades and uncertainty tries to take its place. Robert leaned back and closed his eyes. For years, he had encouraged his students to keep going, to try, even when they were unsure, to believe in themselves. even when it felt difficult. And now, it was his turn to listen to his own advice. He opened his eyes again, picked up the pen, and continued writing. Not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly. Days passed, and his routine began to change in a way he never expected. He started waking up with intention, not because he had somewhere to go, but because he had something to do. Writing became more than an activity. It became his connection to the world. Sometimes, after finishing a page, he would sit quietly and reflect on what he had written. Memories came back to him, moments he had forgotten, lessons he had learned the hard way, regrets he had carried silently for years. And slowly, through his words, he began to understand himself better. One afternoon, while walking through a nearby park, he noticed something he hadn't paid attention to before. An elderly woman sitting on a bench, feeding birds. A man about his age, walking slowly with a cane, but with a small smile on his face. A group of older friends laughing together like they were young again. Life was still happening, all around him. He realized something important in that moment. He wasn't the only one searching for meaning. There were others, just like him. People who had lived long lives, who had given so much, and were now quietly wondering, what comes next? That thought stayed with him as he returned home. That evening, instead of writing just about his own experiences, he wrote about them too, about the silent questions people carry, about the feeling of being overlooked, about the strength it takes to keep going, even when the world moves on without you. And when he shared that piece, something powerful happened. The response was stronger than before. Messages came in from people across different places. I feel seen. This is exactly how I feel. Thank you for putting this into words. Robert read every message slowly, not rushing, not skipping. Each one felt personal. Each one reminded him he wasn't alone. And more importantly, he wasn't speaking into silence anymore. His words were reaching people, helping people, connecting people. But even with this growing response, there were still difficult days. Days when his energy was low. Days when his body felt tired. Days when old thoughts returned, whispering, "Take it easy. You've done enough already." And sometimes, he listened. He would take a break, sit by the window again, watch the world move outside. But now, those pauses didn't feel like giving up. They felt like rest. Because deep down, he knew he would return. That was the difference. Before, he had stopped completely. Now, he paused, but he didn't quit. One evening, his son called him. It had been a while since they had a long conversation. After the usual greetings, his son said something unexpected. "Dad, I read something online today. It sounded like you." Robert smiled slightly. "It probably was," he replied. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then his son said, "I didn't know you felt that way, but I'm glad you're sharing it. It's really good." Those words meant more than any number of views or messages, because for the first time in years, his family was seeing him not just as a retired man, but as someone still growing, still creating, still living with purpose. After the call ended, Robert sat quietly for a while. He looked around his home again. The same walls, the same furniture, the same photographs, but everything felt different. Not because the outside had changed, but because he had changed. He had stopped waiting for life to give him meaning and started creating it himself. That realization gave him a new kind of strength. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. The kind of strength that doesn't disappear overnight. The kind that grows quietly, day by day. As weeks turned into months, his writing became more structured. He began organizing his thoughts into chapters. What once was a simple idea was now becoming something real. A book, the very thing he once wrote down as a distant dream. But this time, it didn't feel distant anymore. It felt possible. And that possibility changed the way he saw everything. He started setting small goals for himself. Today, I'll write 2 pages. This week, I'll finish 1 chapter. He didn't rush. He didn't pressure himself. He simply stayed consistent. And that consistency became his foundation. There was no sudden breakthrough, no overnight success, just steady progress. And sometimes, that's even more powerful, because it builds something that lasts. One afternoon, while reviewing his work, he came across something he had written in the beginning. "I feel like I've been forgotten." He read that line again, and then he smiled, because it no longer felt true. Not completely. He was still the same man, still living in the same house, still walking the same streets, but inside, something had awakened. He felt connected again, not just to others, but to himself. And maybe that's the most important connection of all. So if you're listening right now, and you've started something no matter how small, but you're feeling doubt, feeling slow, feeling unsure, understand this. The middle part of any journey is always the hardest. It's where motivation fades. It's where results feel far away. It's where many people quietly stop. But this is also where real change happens. Not in the beginning, when everything feels new. Not at the end, when success is visible. But here, in the quiet middle, where you choose to continue, even when no one is watching, even when progress feels invisible, even when your own mind questions you. Because every step you take here, every small effort, every moment you decide not to quit, it builds something inside you, something stronger than doubt, something stronger than fear. Belief. And belief, once it becomes steady, can carry you further than anything else. Robert didn't become someone new overnight. He simply returned to a part of himself he had left behind, a part that still dreamed, a part that still cared, a part that still believed there was more to life. And that part exists in you too. It may feel quiet right now. It may feel distant, but it's still there, waiting, not for the perfect moment, not for the right conditions, just for a simple decision to keep going, to try again, to continue writing your story, one small step at a time. Because this chapter you're in right now, even if it feels slow, even if it feels uncertain, is not the end. It's the part where you become stronger. And strength like that creates the most meaningful endings. The days didn't suddenly become easier for Robert. In fact, some mornings felt heavier than before. The excitement of starting something new had settled into something quieter, something more demanding. Consistency. And consistency has a way of testing you. There were mornings when he stared at the page and felt nothing. No ideas, no energy, just silence. He would sit there, pen in hand, waiting, hoping something would come. Sometimes it didn't. And in those moments, the old voice returned. Maybe this was just a phase. Maybe you've already done enough. Why push yourself now? He didn't argue with those thoughts. He simply sat with them. And then, slowly, he would write anyway, not because he felt inspired, but because he had made a decision. That difference changed everything. He was no longer waiting to feel ready. He was choosing to act, even when he didn't. One afternoon, while organizing his pages, Robert noticed something surprising. His writing had evolved. The early pages were hesitant, almost unsure of themselves. But the recent ones, they carried clarity, depth, honesty. It was as if the more he wrote, the more he understood not just his story, but his voice. And with that understanding came something unexpected. Courage. He began writing about things he had avoided for years. Regret. Moments where he felt he could have done better. Times when he stayed silent instead of speaking up. Times when fear made decisions for him. At first, it was uncomfortable, even painful. But as he continued, he realized something important. Those moments didn't weaken his story. They gave it meaning, because they were real, because they were human. And when he shared those deeper, more personal reflections, the response changed again. It became stronger, more emotional. People didn't just read his words. They felt them. I thought I was the only one who carried regret like this. This made me cry. Thank you for your honesty. Your story feels like my story. Robert sat there one evening, reading those messages over and over again. And for a moment, he closed his eyes, not out of sadness, but out of realization. All those years, he thought his value came from what he did for others. teaching lessons, giving advice, guiding people. But now he understood something deeper. His value also came from simply being honest about his own journey, from showing that life isn't perfect, that even a long life can carry unanswered questions. And that's okay. That realization didn't just change his writing. It changed how he saw himself. He stopped trying to present a perfect version of his story and started embracing the real one, the one with mistakes, the one with doubts, the one with moments of fear, because that's the story people connect with. That's the story that helps others feel less alone. One evening, while taking a slow walk outside, Robert noticed something he hadn't felt in a long time. Excitement, not the loud, energetic kind, but a quiet anticipation, a sense that something meaningful was unfolding. He wasn't rushing anymore. He wasn't comparing himself to anyone. He wasn't thinking about how much time he had left. He was simply present. And in that presence, he found peace. As his manuscript grew, he began to see it not just as a project, but as a message to anyone who had ever felt like their time had passed, a message to those who believed it was too late to begin again, a message that said, "You still matter." One afternoon, he printed out the pages he had completed so far. He placed them on his table and looked at them carefully, page after page, thought after thought. What once existed only as a single sentence in an old notebook was now something real, something tangible. His hands rested gently on the stack of papers, and for a moment, he said nothing, because words weren't enough to describe what he felt. It wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was something deeper, a quiet acknowledgement. I kept going. That was it. Not perfection, not success, just persistence. And sometimes that's the most powerful achievement of all, because persistence doesn't depend on age. It doesn't depend on talent. It depends on choice. The choice to continue, even when it's hard. The choice to move forward, even when progress feels slow. The choice to believe, even when doubt is present. Robert understood now that this journey wasn't just about finishing a book. It was about rediscovering himself, about proving to himself that he was still capable, still growing, still becoming. One evening, as he sat by the window again, watching the world outside, he noticed something familiar. People walking by, children laughing, life moving forward. But this time, he didn't feel like he was standing still. He felt like he was part of it again, not in the same way as before, not through a job or a role, but through something more personal, through purpose. And purpose doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need recognition. It simply needs to be felt, and he felt it now, deeply. So, if you're listening to this, and you've come this far in your own journey, maybe you've started something. Maybe you've taken that first step. Or maybe you're still thinking about it, still waiting, still unsure. Let me tell you something important. There will be moments when it feels difficult. Moments when your energy fades. Moments when your mind questions everything. That's not a sign to stop. That's a sign that you're in the process. Because growth doesn't happen when things are easy. It happens when you continue, even when they're not. And here's something most people don't realize. You don't need a big breakthrough to change your life. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need everything to be clear. You just need to stay in motion. Small steps, taken consistently, with intention. That's how change happens. That's how a new chapter is written. Not in one dramatic moment, but in quiet decisions made every day. Robert didn't become fearless. He didn't eliminate doubt completely, but he learned something more valuable. He learned how to move forward, with doubt still present. And that's what made the difference. Because waiting for fear to disappear can keep you stuck forever. But moving forward despite fear, that's where transformation begins. His story wasn't finished yet. In many ways, it was just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready to see where it would lead. There came a day when Robert finally reached the last page. It wasn't dramatic. There was no music playing in the background, no one standing beside him, no applause. Just a quiet room, a steady breath, and a single moment where his pen stopped moving. He looked down at the page for a long time. Then he gently placed the pen on the table. "It's done," he whispered. But even as he said those words, he knew something deeper. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. He leaned back in his chair, eyes slowly scanning the stack of pages in front of him. Every word carried a piece of his journey. Every sentence held a moment of doubt, effort, persistence, and belief. And suddenly, he felt something he hadn't expected. Not excitement, not relief. Gratitude. Gratitude for the quiet mornings when he showed up. Gratitude for the difficult days when he almost gave up, but didn't. Gratitude for the version of himself who decided to try again, even when it felt late. Because now, he understood something clearly. Finishing the book was not the greatest achievement. Becoming the person who didn't quit was. A few weeks later, Robert decided to take a step he once thought was impossible. He submitted his manuscript for publication. His hands trembled slightly as he clicked the final button. For a brief moment, fear rushed in. What if it's rejected? What if no one cares? But this time, those thoughts didn't stop him. Because he had already learned the most important lesson. His worth was not defined by the outcome. It was defined by the courage to begin and the strength to continue. Days passed, then weeks. And one morning, as he sat with his usual cup of tea, his phone buzzed. An email. He opened it slowly. His eyes moved across the words, carefully, almost cautiously. And then they stopped. They stayed fixed on one line. "We are pleased to inform you." He didn't read the rest right away. He didn't need to. A quiet smile appeared on his face. Not a loud celebration. Not an overwhelming reaction. Just a deep, calm understanding. I did it. But even in that moment, Robert knew something important. The real victory wasn't the acceptance. It wasn't the recognition. It wasn't even the book. The real victory was the journey that brought him there. Because that journey gave him something no result ever could. It gave him himself back. In the months that followed, his book reached people in ways he never imagined. Messages came from different places, different ages, different backgrounds. People who felt lost. People who felt invisible. People who believed their time had passed. And through his words, they found something again. Hope, purpose, a reason to try. One message stood out to him more than the others. It was simple. "You reminded me that my life isn't over." Robert read that line more than once. And each time, it meant more. Because that was the same message he had once needed himself. That was the same truth he had almost forgotten. One evening, as he sat by the window once again, watching the world move outside, everything felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. The silence in his home was still there. But now, it felt peaceful. The routine was still simple, but now, it had meaning. And the man who once asked, "Is this it?" now knew the answer. No, this is just the beginning. So if you're here, still listening, maybe a part of you feels like Robert once did. Maybe you've been waiting. Waiting for a sign. Waiting for the right time. Waiting for something to change. But here's the truth. The right time is not something you find. It's something you create. And it doesn't start with something big. It starts with something small. A thought. A decision. A simple moment where you say to yourself, "I'm not done yet," because you're not. No matter your age, no matter your past, no matter how long you've been standing still, there is still something inside you waiting to be lived. A dream, a purpose, a voice. And it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to begin. Robert didn't change his life overnight. He didn't become someone else. He simply chose to take one step, and then another, and then another. And those steps created a path that led him back to himself. And that same path is available to you right now, in this moment. So don't wait for everything to feel right. Don't wait for doubt to disappear. Don't wait for someone else to tell you it's okay. Give yourself that permission. Start small, stay consistent, and trust that even the smallest step forward can lead to something meaningful. Because a new chapter doesn't begin when everything is perfect. It begins when you decide it does. And if this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of something you've been holding inside, Take that next step and don't keep it to yourself. Share this message with someone who might need it. Someone who feels like it's too late. Someone who has forgotten their own strength. And if you haven't already, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and become part of a community that believes in growth at every stage of life. Because stories like this aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to be lived. And your story is still waiting for its next chapter. So begin right now.